voice, let it be you, God, not me. And as you're praying, I caught myself, let it be me, not you. I'm like, no, let it be God, not me. What am I doing here? Anyway, sorry. It was just caught me as funny that I got dyslexic in my mind for a second there. I'm like, yes, let this be me, God, and not you. No, good morning. Sorry. As I'm rambling on, everyone's looking at me like I'm crazy. Happy Thanksgiving, right? Again, happy Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is over, right? Christmas trees, how many of them are out? How many Christmas trees are out? Yes, nice. Good job. Good job. How many people got lights on the houses? Lights on the houses? Amen, amen, amen. No? Good. Any Christmas cookies being made presently? No. Go ahead and make them. We'll take by the dozen in the church office. We will. It is fine. It's the holidays. It is the holidays. So I said to my wife when we were grocery shopping yesterday, and she's like, what are you hungry? Why are you hungry? I said, it's the holidays. And I was looking at like the double fudge brownies and everything. My whole life is a holiday, let's be honest, when it comes to eating. But anyways, I cooked for Thanksgiving this year. My parents are out of town. They're in Pennsylvania with my grandparents and such, and my cousin Jimmy just had a wedding up there as well. My family loves to do that. My mom's side of the family loves to cram as much as they can in one visit. So as I was talking with my mother the other day, I'm like, how's it going? You relaxing? She laughed on the phone for a good 5 minutes about the term relaxing while visiting relatives in Pennsylvania. The poor woman has been running every day, doing different things with different people, but you know, we stayed home. That's why Carrie and I stayed home. I was like, we're going to not have the crazy. But I did cook. I cooked for my siblings. I have 3 younger sisters. Came over to my house, or to my parents' house for dog sitting. Came over to my parents' house, and I cooked Amish stuffing. And I think I've talked to you guys about that before. All Amish stuffing is 3 loaves of white bread. You can't go wrong with that. 3 loaves of white bread that you cube up with celery and onions and a little bit of poultry seasoning. And you have to roast a turkey. And you pull the turkey apart and you mix the turkey in with the stuffing. And then what makes, stuffing has to have liquid, right, to make the bread kind of mushy and stuff like that. Most people put chicken stock in that to help that out. Maybe a stick of butter or something. Not the Amish. The Amish, they do 1.5 pounds of butter in that. So that was 6 sticks of butter. I even called my grandmother up, it's my mama, it's her recipe. I called her up and I said, are you sure it's 1 pound of butter? She said, oh yeah, it's a pound. I said, do you put any chicken stock? She goes, no, you'll see. Once that butter melts down, there'll be plenty of liquid in there for that. So we mixed it up. We had a great time. But the other thing that is always a staple at Thanksgiving is my mama's, this is my dad's mom, apple pie. She makes the best apple pie. Hands down, bar none, the best apple pie to taste. And, it has been my life's work to try to figure out how to make this pie. And my mama, she gave us all of us cooks in the family, she gave us a recipe of all of her recipes, and Mama's apple pie is in that recipe. So, of course, I'm looking at the recipe, and here's the thing, is that I don't know if your moms or grandmas are like this, and I have a picture of the pies. There they are. That's them. I made them. That's Mama's pie. That's what I made. Everyone look and marvel at those. They were yummy. Thank you. No, she has a recipe book, and if your moms or mamas are like this, if they have recipes, they tend to leave things out of the recipe. It's kind of written down to spec, and her recipe called for 2/3 cup of sugar. Last year I tried to make these. It didn't quite taste right. My mama came to help us out with our wedding, and for our rehearsal dinner, my request was that we would have Mama's apple pie as dessert for the rehearsal dinner, so she made a whole bunch of pies. I got to talking with her in February about these pies, and I said, Mama, I made these pies before, and they just didn't quite taste right. And I said, and I looked at the recipe, it calls for 2/3 sugar. She goes, oh, well, I put in maybe more than 2/3 cup of sugar. I'm thinking, I got you, woman. I know exactly what's happening here. So in talking with her, I thought, score. I found the secret. She puts more sugar in it. So this year, I go ahead and make this apple pie. And I see the 2/3 cup of sugar, and I said, nay, you're not gonna fool me this time. And I put 2 cups of sugar in it. And I went about my business doing what I was going to do. I mean, sugar's great. And let's be honest, when grandmas make stuff, you who are grandmothers and mothers too, grandmas in training, you guys just like ooze sweetness. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, I think guys can try to make their grandmother stuff if they want to, but it's never going to be the same. But so I'm doing this, mixing it in and mixing all these ingredients together, and it looks a little darker. The apples look a little darker than normal. And I realized that I had put too much cinnamon in. She called for 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And I was going quickly, just assuming I knew what I was doing, didn't really care, kind of like glancing at it now, because now it's just easy stuff that you're mixing together, throw in the pie shell. I put a tablespoon of cinnamon in there versus the 2 teaspoons. Come to find out later when I talked to her on the phone, she revealed another secret. She doesn't even use 2 teaspoons. She just sprinkles the cinnamon on top. So next year, the secrets are going to get made. But when I misread the directions and I put too much cinnamon in, I still made a pie. They still came out. They weren't exactly the pies that I had expected, but it is still a pie. I still have a pie there. It looks like a pie, but when you tasted it, it wasn't quite Mama's apple pie. The point of the story is that when we go about things on our own, off our own talents, off our own power, off our own bias, off maybe our own misguided assumptions, thinking that we know it, but we're not going back to check to make sure that we got it all correct. It kind of creates some false expectations. I thought that I was going to get Mama's apple pie, and what I got was an apple pie, but not the good stuff, not what it should have been. The opposite can occur, and it can cause us to completely doubt possibly the process, and I did. I went back to the recipe. I'm like, wait a second, what did I miss here? I mean, this looks like it's supposed to be here. What did I miss? What did I go wrong? And lo and behold, it was the cinnamon. Our reading today, as I forgot to read it, our reading today comes from Luke 7. In Luke 7, this is, as I was wrestling back and forth, what to talk about today for Advent. It's the first Sunday of Advent. We lit the hope candle, the expectation, the prophecy candle. It's the Hope Sunday. I was thinking, what can we talk about today to really kick off our season of Advent? Last Sunday, we ended our church season. We talked about Christ the King. This Sunday starts the church calendar off, and it is the season of Advent where we're looking towards the expected King. So back and forth as to what to come up with. And the thing that really just laid on my heart was John the Baptist, oddly enough. John the Baptist, at one point, sends, we're going to read here in a minute, sends disciples to Jesus. John's in jail. John the Baptist is in jail. He got thrown in jail because he was telling Herod what he should and shouldn't do, and that never bodes well for anybody. And he gets thrown in jail. And while he's in jail, something happens. Something goes on in John's assumptions and John's expectations of who Jesus is, and he sends 2 of his disciples out to Jesus to ask a very probing, very haunting question coming from somebody who all his life was told that he was going to prepare the way to the Messiah. Let's read this. This is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, verse 18 to 23. The disciples of John reported to him about all these things being the signs, the things that Jesus was doing in his earthly ministry, healings and Sermon on the Mount and things like that. Summoning 2 of his disciples, John sent them to the Lord, saying, "Are you the expected one? Or do we look for someone else?" And when the men came to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to ask, are you the expected one? Or do we look for someone else?" Now at that very time, he, being Jesus, cured many people of diseases and afflictions and evil spirits. And he gave sight to many who were blind. And he answered and said to those disciples, John's disciples, he said, "Go and report to John what you have seen and what you have heard. The blind receive sight. The lame walk. The lepers are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised up. The poor have the gospel preached to them." And then he says this at the end of this, you go and tell. He says, "Blessed is he who does not take offense at me. Blessed is he who does not stumble over me," would be another way of saying those things. So here is John the Baptist, who we're going to talk about today. And our reading shows that even the best of Jesus' followers, and really John the Baptist, I'm going to talk a little bit later, John the Baptist, he was really raised up to be this voice out in the wilderness, calling and preparing the way of the coming Messiah. And in fact, later in this discourse that we read in Luke 7, Jesus really kind of brings John up and says that he's the best prophet that you're ever going to see, that you're ever going to hear. And yet we have this John the Baptist guy in jail right now, thrown in jail for trying to preach the good news, so to speak. He's in jail, and now he is sending two people out to ask Jesus, are you really the guy? Are you really him? Or do I need to be looking elsewhere? And the thing is, why? Why did this happen? Why did John say these things? Why did John, in full knowledge of who Jesus is, say and ask this question, are you the one? And we're seeing this road of doubt that John is on and asking this question. And it's looking like John was assured that he had the whole recipe down. And yet the product that came out was not what he expected and called the question, are you the one? Last week we talked about Jesus Christ being the victorious king. This week, and what we're going to look at through the rest of Advent, whether explicitly or implicitly, is Jesus the expected king, the one who is to come. And this is where we're going to be preparing our hearts about this, about turning our hearts and our minds and our souls to really looking at the expected King Jesus coming to earth. And what I'd like us to do today is, as we are keeping that in mind, that we also think about living this year out, since this is the start of the church year, living this year out as people expecting Jesus. You know, like when people come to your house that you're expecting, and maybe open the door and say, we've been expecting you. Come on in. That's how I love us to live our lives out. This Advent season and the rest of the church year as people who look for opportunities and who live their lives out as thinking, Jesus, we've been expecting you. We've been expecting you. Not like John the Baptist, where he sends people, are you really it? No. And those times, I want us to live as people who are saying, Jesus, we have been expecting you. Now, John is asking this question, are you the expected one? And it caused me to ask questions. Why would someone like John the Baptist be asking this question to Jesus? So I'm going to ask the text 3 questions myself, and we're going to look at 3 questions here today. And as we look through these questions, I hope that we can kind of maneuver through what is going on with John and kind of see ourselves in the same situation in our own lives, kind of thing. And at the end of the sermon, then we'll give an Advent challenge. What I'll challenge you to do this year as living as people who think, we've been expecting you, Jesus. So the first question that I want to look at, in looking at what is going on here in this text, is, what causes our expectations of Jesus to go awry? What causes them to kind of get off balance here? What causes them to see something different than what is truly going to happen? And the answer to that we'll discuss is our misguided assumptions get in the way of divine expectations. And let me flesh this out. When we, in faith, expect something to happen, expectation in faith is about truly thinking and believing that what we expect God and Jesus to do is actually going to happen. They expect that Jesus, the Messiah, was going to come. They expect that Jesus will be raised again. We expect that Jesus is going to come back again a second time. We know these things are truly going to happen. And the reason why we know these things are truly going to happen is because of our faith. That our faith is situated and seated on our knowledge of Scriptures and our wisdom that is given by God only. Now, where this goes awry is if we don't have our knowledge seated on Scriptures, and if our wisdom is coming by our own lives and experiences and not from God himself. Does that make sense? Expectation is not only faith looking back at the history of what God has done and attributing it to God, like, yes, God has done these awesome things, but it's also looking forward to what God will do and fully expecting it to happen. It's not like when we say what we expect God to do, it's not like we're giving him an order list to say, we expect you to do X, Y, and Z. It's just that we expect him to do the things that he is going to do. And we joyfully wait for that to happen. Make sense? This is what expectations are about within our faith. And the cool thing about this is, one way to explain this, is that this type of faith and this type of hope and expectation differs from trivial expectations. Like we expect to pass the test, but if we don't pass the test, it's okay. These type of expectations are a lot like the childlike faith that we see in children around this time of year. Kids expect the big red guy to come. Kids expect that their presents will be there, that they had asked for. Unless you're like my family. My family, I expected Santa to give me a Power Wheel, and I didn't get a Power Wheel. I got a big wheel instead. Big wheel you have to use your own energy for. Power Wheels, is the cool one, where they're kind of motorized. A little lesson in that from life there. But childlike faith, truly looking that this is going to happen. And this is what our call is for going through this Advent season and going through life in general as believers of Jesus, is that we have these divine expectations that he is going to do what he is going to do, and we have faith in that. Now, John the Baptist, I believe he had those expectations also of Christ. I believe that John the Baptist really did have divine expectations. And let me explain that. You see, John the Baptist, if you remember from the nativity stories, what we read at Christmas, you remember when Mary got her vision, got her message from the angel? Mary goes to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, her friend, who should not be having babies, actually is with child. It's another miracle child happening, and she's holding John the Baptist. And when Mary comes up to Elizabeth, both of them with child, John the Baptist in the womb leaps. And Elizabeth knows that something awesome is happening here. Her child is leaping at the presence of Mary coming, who is now holding the Lord in her womb. So we have that. We have the history of Elizabeth, John's mom. We have the history of Zacharias, John's dad. And John's dad, Zacharias, also gets a vision of who John is going to be. He says in Zacharias' vision, it's really cool, it's really awesome. He says this, "And his father Zacharias was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, saying, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has visited us and accomplished redemption for his people. He has raised up the horn of salvation for us in the house of David his servant, as he spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from old, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy toward our fathers and to remember his holy covenant, the oath which he swore to Abraham our father, to grant us that we, being rescued from the hand of our enemies, might serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High." This is for John the Baptist. "You, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High. For you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give his people the knowledge of salvation by the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, with which the sunrise from on high will visit us, to shine upon those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet onto the way of peace." So both John's parents, mom and dad, have these divine angelic things happening, prophecies happening about who their son's going to be. So you know that John was raised with that in mind. If you are parents and you've got two divine things coming about your child, you are probably going to make sure you remind them at every mistake that they make. Now remember, you're going to be the prophet of the Son Most High. You got to get it together, right? So you know that he grew up with this. And of course, and that goes on to say that then John grows up to be, this guy out in the wilderness preparing the way for Christ, for the Messiah. So I got to believe that John had the divine expectations, had the knowledge of thinking this is what Jesus is going to do. And yet we get the question in our reading today of sending two of his disciples while John is in prison. Are you the one? Are you really the one? Are you the one who was to come? Or should we look someplace else? And I think the thing is, as we got this picture, that we see maybe John's assumptions and the reality of what Jesus is doing in full view. Somewhere along the way, his assumptions got a little off balance. He's not playing with the whole recipe at this point if he's sending this question to Jesus. The recipe got off base. See, Zechariah's prophecy beautifully states the Messiah's redeeming, healing work. He will be the guide of our feet into the way of peace, is what Zechariah talks about the Messiah, what he will do. Not only does Zechariah's prophecy do that, but if you were following along with what I read, and I know I read fast, but in that prophecy that Zechariah says, he looks back to the Old Testament. He remembers and says all of what God has done so far. He's looking back, and he's looking forward. And he's trying to teach John and trying to teach us that this is what's going to happen. Yet, John's assumptions got a little bit off base. Maybe he didn't want to listen to Dad or whatever. I don't know. The thing is that I wouldn't go so far as to say that John the Baptist has left the ship of Jesus at this point in jail, asking this question of, are you the one? I'm not going to say that. It doesn't say that in the text. It just says that John has sent people to Jesus while he is in jail, and he's questioning who Jesus is, and I want to know why. And it was really similar to his question is very similar to another account in the Gospel of John, not John the Baptist, but in the Gospel of John, we have another person in John chapter 3 that comes to Jesus by night. His name's Nicodemus. He comes to Jesus by night, asking kind of the same question. I've seen the signs, I've seen you do things, and I know that you can only do this if you're with God. But he falls short of proclaiming Jesus to be the Son of God, the true Son of God, the King of, whatever name you want to do. And Jesus, has this interaction with Nicodemus, basically saying that if you're not born from above, if you can't see these things, you're not going to be up there with me. You're not going to come to me. The truth does not come that way. You need to be born from above, not born from here. And Jesus goes through that. And then, of course, in John 3, we get the saying, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. You know the whole thing in John 3. As I was looking at that, because I remembered Nicodemus asking the same question, I thought, well, John's asking, are you the one? Nicodemus, who's a Pharisee, who has nothing like what John has, he's asking Jesus if he's the one. I said, there's some similarities there. And then lo and behold, in Scriptures, after the Nicodemus account, the Gospel of John talks about John the Baptist's testimony. And this is before John has been thrown into prison. It is recorded that John the Baptist has said this, that the disciples of John the Baptist came to him in the woods and said, this Jesus guy is doing what you're doing. What's going on here? And John the Baptist says to them this, a man can receive nothing unless it has been given him from heaven. You yourselves are my witnesses that I have said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent ahead of him. He who is the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. So this joy of mine has been made full. He, being Jesus, must increase, but I have to decrease. He who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth is from the earth and will speak of the earth. He who comes from heaven is above all, he says. What he has seen and heard of it is what he testifies, and no one receives this testimony. He who has received this testimony has set his seal to this, that God is true. For he whom God has sent speaks the words of God, for he gives the Spirit without measure. The Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hand. He who believes the Son has eternal life, but he who does not obey the Son will not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. This is John the Baptist giving this great identity of who Jesus Christ is before he goes to prison. Did you catch that? Before he goes to prison, he gives this great identity of Jesus. He is expecting Jesus to do all the messianic things. But, as we read, he sends people, are you really the one? How do we get from John the Baptist living this life, this great testimony that we have read in John, to now here? Are you the one? When it comes to this. When it comes to losing our expectation, when it comes to doubting that what we thought was going to happen didn't quite happen, it goes back to our misguided assumptions. Perhaps John was too busy looking forward. He forgot about the stuff in the back. I don't know. Perhaps the storm was surrounding him, and he thought, what is going on here? I need to Jesus is supposed to come and save me from being imprisoned, and this is not happening. So when it happens, and this is why I gave you the illustration of me cooking the pie, it's because I got so wrapped up in myself that I forgot to see what was going on. And when we cook things like this and we miss things in the recipe, we get stuff that isn't correct. So what then is the danger of living life with just an assumption of the recipe, so to speak? What is the danger of living life with just an assumption rather than the divine expectation? The divine expectation that sits on discipleship and that sits on wisdom. What is the danger of living with just now an assumption of that instead of the true expectation? Well, it leads to a false Jesus. Now again, I don't think that John the Baptist is fully sold out into thinking that this Jesus Christ that he's asking, if he's the one, is a false Messiah. I just think that his mind is racing, and he's scared because what he thought the Messiah was going to do didn't happen. I'll explain that in just a second. You see, he's in jail. Herod has thrown him in jail. He's most likely going to die. John's assumptions of the Messiah are based off of prophecies that are there, that the Messiah is going to come, release the captives, judge Israel, and bring about this new age. The victorious Jesus that we talked about last Sunday. That's what John is looking at. He has missed all the peaceful stuff that his dad talked about. He's missed all of that. And what we know now as we're reading this, that what the prophecies of the Old Testament are looking at, they're looking at this first wave of the Messiah coming in and bringing about peace and cleansing the hearts of the people, opening up the doors of salvation to not just Jews but to Gentiles. This is what Jesus is doing now, preparing us for what's to come. Make sense? John's just jumped to what's to come. So, of course, he's going to ask this question because he's sitting in jail and he's not being set free. He's hearing reports that Jesus has done this Sermon on the Mount where he's talking about blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall receive heaven. He's heard about Jesus healing a Roman centurion slave. A Roman centurion is not even Jewish. He's hearing all of these things and he's thinking, whoa, what about me? I'm here stuck in jail. I was the one who was prophesied to say, prepare the way of the Lord, and here I am sitting rotten in jail. What's going on? And I think John may be probably sitting there thinking, did I foul this up? I had one job in life, and I seem to have missed it. I may have prepared the way for the wrong person. Let me send this convoy out to ask, are you really the one? And are you really the one really is a haunting question, I think, too, and that's probably why I was drawn to it, is that because I also think for us, how many times have we asked in the midst of our trials and patience, in the midst of things going on, how many times have we looked to the heavens and said, are you really there? Right? I mean, I think I'm honest, right? I think a lot of us in this room have wrestled with that question. Are you really there? And it scares us. I think it probably scared him too. Are you really the one? Is this really you? And we ask this at times when our assumptions of what ought to be done are outside the will or maybe just ahead of the time of what God is doing. Sometimes we assume and expect God to do godly things, but we want that to happen now, and God's saying that's going to happen a little later. Make sense? And that kind of gets us off kilter. It makes us want to send messengers to God. Are you really the one? I'm sitting here waiting. Told you at the beginning of the message that my cousin Jimmy got married. Jimmy is the son of my Aunt Joy. If some of you who know the story of my Aunt Joy, I'm not going to go into it too long today because we don't have time for it. But my Aunt Joy presently is in jail, serving a 7 to 20-year sentence for a crime that we believe that she did not commit, but the jury found her guilty. And she has lost all of her appeals. She has lost even her chance for parole. She had a chance for parole to get out in time for her son's wedding, and she lost it. And this is a time where people in my family look to the heavens and say, are you really there? Are you really there? Where are you at, Jesus, in the midst of this? Where are you at in the midst of the storm, oh God? And the thing is that we know that her release will happen on God's time, but that doesn't always match up to our assumptions. It's in these times that we need to rely and lean on God the most, lean on Christ the most. Live lives of, Jesus, we have been expecting you, and have the hope and expectation and the workings of the Messiah to do what God has called him to do, what God is working on in this world to do. And it has nothing to do with what we want to happen. It has everything to do with what God is doing. And our expectations need to be seated in that. So when our hearts want to say, are you really there? We need to take a stop and look and remember that Jesus is really there. That we now, at this time, we know that he stands victorious, he's going to come again, and that he continues to work in our lives here today, regardless of those situations. Jesus' response to John the Baptist is also a fulfilling of prophecy. After John sends, are you the expected one question, Jesus does all of these miracles that match up to Isaiah 35. And he tells the disciples that came, go back to John the Baptist, tell him exactly what I did. So that John gets the rest of the recipe. That he remembers that not only is the Messiah going to come to be victorious, but he's also going to come and do these things in the work in the land right now. Don't lose your expectation, John. Don't lose it. And then the last thing he says, blessed are you who doesn't take offense at me, who doesn't stumble. Who doesn't stumble over me is basically what it says. So after doing the miracles, after getting the question from John, are you really there? After fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah and sending them back, he sends them back with the last message. Remember to tell John this, blessed are you who does not take offense at me, who doesn't stumble over me. And it brings me to my third question. My third question is, why do we stumble over Jesus in the first place? That seems like an oxymoron. Jesus should not be causing us to stumble. You shouldn't see Jesus with his foot out there trying to trip us up. That seems mean. But basically what he's saying, don't stumble over me. And the thing is that we stumble over Jesus for this reason, because he is so awesome and so good and so the epitome of God's glory here on earth that when he does things that we don't understand, it's outside of our comprehension of what good is. John, looking at Jesus' actions here on this earth, was outside of his comprehension of what's going on. And Jesus forewarns them, don't stumble because of this. Keep your expectation, keep your divine hope in me, and understand that I am doing what my Father has called me to do, and that you have fulfilled what you were called to do in preparing the way. Now don't stumble over this. Make sense? And the thing is that Jesus gives us glimpses of his goodness and his action, not only here in scriptures, but also in our lives right now. We can see where Jesus is at work, so long as we have the eyes to see it, and we're not stumbling over it. So long as we expect to see it, that we expect Jesus to move and work and show himself in this world. So he gives us these glimpses of that so that we don't stumble, so that we don't forget that he is good and he is doing these things. The last illustration I want to do to explain that is from C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It's a book, and in this book you have two characters, Lucy and Edmund, and they have finished their last adventure in Narnia. And Narnia is this place, this magical place where these kids get swept up and they have these adventures and they get encounters, they get glimpses of this Jesus figure named Aslan, and he's a lion. Okay? And Lucy and Edmund, they have just completed basically their last adventure in Narnia. And they're sad. And they're sad. And Lucy's afraid. She's afraid that once they leave Narnia, that they will not know Aslan anymore. That they'll forget. They'll forget all of what they have seen, all of what they have heard. And Lewis writes this great quote from Aslan. And he says this. When Lucy asks Aslan, "Are we going to forget you? Are you at the place where we're going also?" And Aslan says, "I am. But there I have another name. You must learn to know me by that name. This was the very reason why you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there. That by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there." When the Messiah came, when Jesus came for the first time as a baby, I like to think that was the start of our Narnia. That God chose to send an image, a tangible image of who he was in his son Jesus, to give us glimpses of the glory of God, and to put it on full display on the cross at the end so that we would not be mistaken that God is for us and with us, and he will be with us to the end of time, and we will see him again. Doing all those things, giving these snapshots of the awesomeness of who God is so that we can live a life in divine expectation, expecting Jesus to do things that is of him and through him. He gives us these glimpses so that we would know him for a while here, so that one day when we go to heaven and see him for real, it's not going to be, "Jesus, we've been expecting you." It's going to be him looking at us and saying, "Come, child, I have expected you." Make sense? So to go back of the whole entire story of John the Baptist, this guy who was a prophet, the highest prophet that we'll ever see, says this great identity speech and this testimony of who Jesus is, and yet he lands in jail and he begins to doubt, "Oh, did I do something wrong? This is not going the way I had planned." And Jesus says to him, "John, don't stumble. Blessed are you who does not take offense at me. Don't stumble over me. Be in joyful expectation of what I am doing, and be in joyful expectation of what I'm going to do. Don't stumble over me. Know me for a little here, so you can know me better there." It is awesome to think that we are still in a Narnia time even right now, where these glimpses of God come to us so that we can know him better and hold on to that and not be surprised when God does the unthinkable and the unexpected. That's the awesome thing. So what I'm going to say to you here at the end is that as we set our tables and prepare our homes for Christmas, this is Advent, this is the Sunday of expectation, of expecting Jesus to do awesome things. Not only in these 4 weeks of Advent, but for the entire church year, to live lives out of Jesus we've been expecting you. As you begin to prepare your hearts for Christmas and prepare your tables and prepare your homes, I ask you this, to take time. To take time as a family, as a couple, as an individual, to read the old prophecies of the Messiah. To go back to the Old Testament. If you don't know what they are, Google is your best friend. Go on to Google and say, Old Testament prophecies of the Messiah. Read them as a family. Look back and remember what God has done. Then also take time in the midst of your celebration to celebrate the coming King who has come now in this place, our Emmanuel, God with us. And then also to take time and look forward to what Jesus is going to do, and to read about the coming of the second coming of Jesus the Messiah. Take this as an Advent challenge. Take this as a time of joyful expectation that Jesus Christ is with us and for us, and that Jesus Christ is going to do awesome things. Pray that God gives us the eyes to see those things. Pray that God gives us the heart to believe in those things, to not doubt, and to not petition him and ask, "Are you really here, God?" Jesus, we have been expecting you. Father, we thank you for this season of Advent. And as we talk about things like preparation and hope, expectation and joy, as we look at the lights, the trees, we get swept up in the hullabaloo of the season. Lord, remind us of times in our lives where we doubted. Give us hope where we see you active in our lives, where those doubts are removed. Be with us, O God, as we live these lives, expecting you to show up, expecting you to do the things that you have been called and designed to do, not by our will, but by yours. For we are yours, and we just thank you for your many gifts and blessings. It's in Jesus' name that we pray these things. Amen.
Amen. You know, our faith is not in ourselves, as Mike so eloquently put. It's not in what we can do, what we can accomplish. It's not in what God has blessed us with. Our faith is in God alone. So as we get ready to receive this offering, let's think about it like this. By giving, we say to ourselves and anybody else, we say to our family that my faith is not in what I have. It's not in what I've accumulated. It's not in what God has blessed me with. My faith is in God alone. And this offering symbolizes that. It's a declaration of faith. It's stating to yourself, to your family, of your priorities, of what's important to you. It's a way of confirming what God has done in each and every heart. So let us continue our worship today by giving his tithes and our offerings.